Okay, so let's finish this first part. So right here we have the new state, and this new state equals to all of the inputs, the whole state. Now, and you might be thinking, why updating the whole state? So right here, if we go to user, at the top we have one key that's going to be equal to form data, and inside we have all the information about the inputs. And what we are going to be updating is going to be all the information. Again, it's one key, one value, which is called form data. The thing is that inside form fields, we cannot access new state.form data or .name and then just update one value inside this, because the application will not take it, will not re-render. So what we need to do is we need to pass the whole new state, the value of this form data key. But to pass this, we need to pass all. If not, it's just going to be updating the value, and form data is going to be equal to value and not name and last name and everything else. So that's why we need to pass the whole object. So I'm going to go back to form fields, and we know that whenever we type something, we are getting the new state. In this case, if I type an H, right here we get name and the value is going to be H. Okay, so we have the new state. So we need to pass this new state to the user component so we can update the state right here. If you remember, we have a function called change, and this change receives an argument of a value, whatever, variable, and then it's going to be calling to a new function called update form, and it's going to pass that argument that we are getting. Okay, so I'm going to go back to form fields. I'm going to delete this, and since we are passing as props called change, what we can do, we can access props, and we have that function available. And it's going to be called, of course, it's going to be called change, open and close, and we're going to be passing as an argument the new state. Okay, so now this change is going to get triggered, and this is going to receive the new state as an argument, and it's going to be running this update form, and it's going to pass the new state. And right here inside update form, we are getting that argument, and we are doing the console log. So pretty much we are doing the same thing we were doing right here, doing the console log. So if I go right here and type a G, we get name and last name, and name is going to have value G. Okay, but now we are inside the user component, and we have access to update the state of this one. So what we're going to do right here, just going to delete this, and we're going to be doing this .set state, this .set state, open and close, and we're going to say that form data is going to be equal to the new state. I'm going to save it. I'm going to go right here, and now if we type something, since it's going to be updating the state whenever we trigger a non-change, we should be able to get the values right here. I'm going to say FRNCIS, Francis. So this is working. It's updating the input with whatever value we have inside form data, and the same thing right here, last name. Good. So this one works. Now the problem is that if we want to submit something, we want to submit the form, we just need the name of the key and just the value. Everything else for us, it's going to be irrelevant. We cannot use it. So we need a way to loop through all the contents and just get the key and the value. Okay, so right here we have this submit form. We don't have a function that does that, so we're going to create it right now. I'm going to say submit form is going to be equal to an event, open and close, and of course we run a function. Now we pass the event as an argument, and this submit form needs to do just like we did before, event, prevent, and then default. All right, so this is going to stop the form from submitting. So now what we need to do, we need to loop the current state and get the name of the key and just the value, this portion of code. Okay, so first I'm going to create a variable that it's going to store all of this. So I'm going to say data to submit, makes sense. It's going to be equal to open and close. Okay, so now we need to loop the information that we have and create this data to submit. So I'm going to create a for, open and close, and then just rerun the for. Now the for needs the key, so I'm going to say let key. And remember that key is going to be equal to last name and name. All right, good. And then of course we need to do a space and in, and we say this, that state, and since we want to loop the state of form data, we say form data. Okay, so now on each iteration, is going to be accessing the key. So I'm going to say, okay, so what I want to do, I want to create inside data to submit a key that is going to be equal to the key. On the first iteration, this key is going to be equal to name. So now data to submit is going to have a key of name, something like something like that. And now the value of name is going to be equal to this, that state dot form data. Then we pass the key, that in this case is name, and then we pass the value. So in the first iteration, this one is going to be equal to whatever value we have. All right, and then on the next iteration is going to say last name is going to be equal to whatever. All right, okay, so I'm going to delete this, we don't need it. Let me make this a little bit better. Okay, so this is pretty much done. Now if I do console log, let's do console.log, open and close, and I console the data to submit, we're going to get the information we need to make a network request. I'm going to type Francis, I'm going to type Jones, whatever, and I'm going to do submit. And okay, we get name, Francis, and last name, submit. So we have all the data we need to make a network request. And now in the future, if you want to add more inputs, what you need to do is just copy one of the ones we have right here, then comma, do something else, something like that. Something is going to be an input, something. We just need to change something simple right here, and then something, whatever, doesn't matter. And the template, the function is going to pick this up, and it's going to be rendering. So if we type Francis, then Jones, then else, and we submit the form, we get it. We get that. So this is ready to submit. So now inside the the submit form, we can make a network request just like we did before with Axios, then post, and the URL, then comma, and then we pass this data to submit. And that's it. That's all you need. It's going to do a network request and post the values you have inside data to submit. Of course, we don't have Axios. We are going to do something else right here in a minute. Okay, so everything is ready. We're going to do a quick, conclusion of all of this because I need you to make sure that you know what we are doing, that it kind of makes sense to you. And then we're going to be doing validations. And of course, this form data, all of these rules are going to be changing a little bit. We're going to be extending this. So again, it's going to be getting a little bit more confused. So we're going to do a little recap and all of this logic right here. Okay, so let's recap what we have so far. So first, we have a component that it should be rendering a form element, some form elements just like this. We have a state with an index, like a manifest of the inputs that we want to create. The first input is going to be a name, and it's going to be a type of input. And the second one, it's a last name, and it's going to be a type of input. Okay, so then we run a component, we call to a component called form fields, and we pass the information, the state of form data, which is all of this. Okay, so that form fields is going to be entering right here, and is going to be calling render fields. Now this component, this form fields, is going to be receiving some props, with all of this data we have on top. Okay. So the first function that is going to be running, it's render fields. Now, if you notice inside here, this object is not good to us because we need to create one input for each of the elements we have inside form data. So this function, it's creating a new type of array. We are restructuring everything so we can loop the information. So for each element, we are grabbing this and we are pushing inside form data array. So now we get the information on a different manner. So we get form array. Let me save it. So now we get just like this, an array of objects with an ID of name, and then settings is going to be, the actual information on each key. Good. So once we have this form array, it's going to be looping this form array, and for each element we have inside form data, name and last name in this case, is going to be calling to render templates to render one input, and it's going to be passing the item on each iteration. Good. So the job of this render templates is going to be checking what type of element we have on each iteration, and it's going to be checking the input, the type of element, which in this case is input. And if we have an input, it's going to render one template. And if you have something else than input, it's going to render a different template. So far, we have only one. Okay, so render templates is going to pass all the information about that item. So render template is going to be going right here. It's going to grab that data, all the information about that. And it's going to be checking what type of element we have right here, values element. And if the case is input, it's going to be returning this template. So in conclusion, if you have 100 types, 100 values right here, different inputs, if you have 100, this function is going to run 100 times, one for each element on that list. So now it's going to be returning this template. Now this template checks if we have a label, and if we do, it's going to put it, and then it's going to be rendering an input because the case is input, of course. Now inside config, on the manifest, inside config, we have all the configuration about that type of input, which is the name, the type text, and a placeholder. So it's including all of that config values. Then it's going to be adding a value, which is going to be equal to this value. Good. At the beginning, it's going to be empty, of course. And then, of course, it's going to be adding those elements inside the screen. Good. So now what we need to do, of course, what it does is to trigger a function every time that we need to change, that we change something, so we can update the state. So we have this function onChange. Now the onChange handler is going to be running a function, and it's going to be passing the event type that contains the information of that input, the values that we are typing right here. And it's going to be passing the ID of the element. Now this is going to be equal to this part of the code, to the key of whatever we want to be updating. Let's say that we want to update name, so this date ID is going to be equal name. Okay, so the job of change handler is going to be entering, creating a data, a variable of new state that it's a copy, just a duplicate of props that form data. And at this point, if nothing gets entered right here, form data is going to be equal to all of this, not just the input, to all of this. So then we access, since we have the ID, which is in this case, let's assume that we are changing this one, equals to name, we access that new state, that name, and we access the value, and we change it with the one that we are typing right here. Okay, and every time we change something, we type something, it's going to be calling a function that calls change. Now we pass this function inside props. If we go to user, whenever we invoke form fields, we have a function called change. This change is going to be running a function. And now this function is going to be expecting the new state, whatever we are just updating right here inside this variable. And right here we're calling change, and we pass an argument. We pass the whole list of all the elements, but the updated version. So, okay, so inside user, this function is going to receive that, and it's going to be calling a function, and it's going to pass those arguments. Now update form, the job of update form is getting that new state, and it's going to be doing this set state. And now it's going to update to the new state with the correct values. Okay, and at the end, whenever we submit the form, we create a variable that contains only the name and the key, which is going to be only with the value, because of course we cannot post this to the server. We just need the name of the key and this value right here. So what we do right here, we create a for loop that is going to be getting the key. In this case, on the first loop is going to be name, and on the second is going to be last name. And to each key is going to be adding the value that we have on the state. And this is going to generate an object with what we want to post to the server. Okay, so this is pretty much all the logic we have so far. So, and again, just like I told before, this works good. If we add more inputs, it's going to be adding all the inputs automatically. Now, the only thing right now is that, we could have different inputs. So we're going to be adding a couple more. It's going to be real simple. It's going to be short. We're going to be adding a text area, and we're going to be adding a select input. With options inside. We're going to be doing that. And then what we're going to do, we're going to be adding validation to this, because validation, it's really important. So let's do that right now.